Okay, so today I want to discuss how it's possible for women to be more depressed than men in modern day, but commit suicide less than men in modern day. Now, granted, there are some really surface level obvious reasons for this. One of the most obvious is probably the fact that women have a lot more mental health help outlets than men do. Women get a lot more support, advice, encouragement, coddling. If a woman has an issue, society in general will say, "It's okay, girl, you're fine, let me help you out." But if men have a problem, they're told to just suck it up. So, there is that. Women have a lot more outlets than men do. There's also the fact that that men are usually pushed down, suck it up, man up, deal with it, no one really cares. And another factor would be the fact that men are usually the ones dealing with most of the problems in the world, dealing with like literal worldwide problems, supporting everybody, dealing with their own demons, dealing with their families' demons, their partners' demons, their friends' demons, and all of the issues going on in the world are primarily faced by men. And when that happens, you're of course a lot more used to hardships. Women are not as used to it as men are. And therefore, when they do face hardships, to women, it's a much bigger deal and therefore causes higher levels of depression. This all makes sense. But these are not the only factors. So I found this post on Instagram where it talks about what it meant to be the perfect wife back in the 50s. Things like have dinner ready when your man came home from work, have a clean house, stuff like that. And I wrote a comment saying, and women were at their peak happiness, because a lot of the comments were from, well, you can imagine. And we're going to read through this thread because I'm going to explain to people why, in fact, women were, in fact, at their happiness back then and are no longer happy. There's a lot of reasons, and it actually does go very deep. But it is a literal proven study. You're more than welcome to look it up yourself, proving that women were actually at their peak happiness in the 60s. Yes, this post is about the 50s, but I'm pretty sure we can say it applies to both decades. Nothing wrong with that. So, let's get on with the thread and enjoy reading. So the first reply I got was, if women were at their peak happiness, why did it change? Why did women protest and work against it? Well, you know what? I can show you. Now, a lot of people will call it a conspiracy theory because these people don't have the capacity to think or research, but it actually was a movement created by the Jews. The people who only think surface level will say, well, actually, what happened was in the 1920s, women were sick of being oppressed, so they rose up for the Women's March. Yeah, that's what people did, but that's not the reason why they did it. In fact, you can even find videos of Jews admitting to this in their own words. I don't have to tell you. You listen to them say it, okay? You don't have to listen to Matt saying it. You can listen to them saying it. In my video, The Epstein Files Have Driven Everyone Insane, I included a compilation of Jews admitting that they control the world. And in this particular clip, listen to what they have to say.
That actually the sexist, homosexual agenda was actually created and funded by Jewry, by the Jews of the United States.
Yeah, we got that going back in the early 1900s. The women's rights movement, we started off, hey, how about you get equal pay for equal work? And women have the right to vote. And everybody bought into that.
Everybody bought into that.
And we started with the women because it's hard to get the men. The women are the weakest sex. And now look at all the women. Most all of them around the world, especially here in America, they got short hair. They got a schwarzer for a boyfriend. They got a lesbian lover. They're married by the time they're 40. But then they can't have too many little children themselves because they've already ruined those years chasing the almighty gold dollar, the shekel, and so they're going to wind up a bunch of old maids because nobody wants them.
And that's exactly what happened in modern day. So the Jews really did plan this over 100 years ago and the real reason, I know it wasn't shown in that clip, but the real reason was because women were primarily stay-at-home moms and wives, they weren't paying into taxes with no job. So they wanted, in order to get higher taxes, they wanted to encourage women to be out in the work world. And you can scream and cry all you want that working is good because it gives us the choice and we can make money, yay! But come on, be real. I know you're deflecting because you're actually more depressed and you're trying to hide it for your happiness. I get it. But the truth is, nobody wants to work. Working is not an enjoyable thing for anybody, not for men and especially not for women. If you were to give women the choice, primarily all of them would say, yeah, I'd rather just be home taking care of the kids or taking care of my husband, whatever. Nobody wants to be working chasing the almighty dollar. But when they encouraged women to do that, and then the cost of living went up like crazy, women were then forced to work because it was no longer feasible for a man to support a family by himself. They manufactured this and then tried to brainwash you all into thinking that it's totally normal to just work your entire life away, not get married because you're too busy working and paying for things. And that's how it really happened. So when you ask me the question, why did it change? That's why. This person here thinks I'm being sarcastic. Sorry, honey, I'm not. Then we got this guy replying. I think he's replying, he's on my side, like the smart side. Honey, I don't think you understand the history of your ideology. Women did not protest all of a sudden. That's true. Women weren't upset about it. That's true too. Women, if you don't believe people like me or this guy, why don't you go just go ask your grandparents? Go ahead, go ask your grandparents if they hated being wives and moms back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Because they literally didn't. Now, I know what some people will say, well, the men were always beating up their wives, and therefore the wives weren't able to speak out about how unhappy they really were. Yeah, that did happen sometimes, and it happened more than it happens today, but if you believe that that's the reason, then you need to stop watching so many movies, because movies are not reality. Not every man in the 50s was just beating his wife if dinner wasn't ready. Of course, that did happen. But if you think that was like the norm, then you are clearly brainwashed by movies that show like the style of like the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Those movies about 1930s gangsters who all just beat up their wives and shit. Not real life is not Goodfellas. I'm sorry to break it to you. It's not. Okay. And feminism was not created by a woman. It was all pushed through advertisements promoting the women's liberation movement. He's right. Okay, but if they weren't upset, then why would they be protesting? Because they were brainwashed into believing that the current lives they were living were bad, even though women got more depressed as time went on. And that's despite the fact that men got better. Why don't you ask yourself this question? If men got better, and your life got better because of the results of your protest, then why are women less happy today? This is not rocket science. It's just basic logic. That's like saying the Palestine protesters aren't angry about anything, you dafty. Sure. This one says, that's right, honey, a select few wanted to be the same as men. Now fast forward 100 years and women can't do the jobs of us men. Bunch of pussycats. To get women in the workplace, so you have to send your child to a school where they are indoctrinated by your government and fed propaganda. That's true too. The other part of the Jewish plan was that if women don't have time to take care of their children because they're working, then you'd be forced to sending them to school or daycares where they be fed the propaganda that you're being fed today. Now, I know that the woke culture really only started in 2012, but it was starting to begin back then. It was just much slower. It started off with PC culture, and then it kind of went, because back then we were calling it, before it was called woke or SJW, we were calling it political correctness. This did start decades ago, but just much slower. And it had to be slow in order to brainwash people. If it was quick, people would have noticed, right? They were tricked by Jews and the devil. So this person knows. This guy comes back and says, well, it's pretty clear from my comment, I'm implying the message was pushed onto them for a certain purpose, and it was, and wasn't their own independent decision. This person replied to me, saying, lie. They were taking antidepressants, and if not, they were getting lobotomized. Someone lied to you. That is literally not true. That is this is like movie mentality, movie brain. You're watching too many movies. Cap. Women were upset about this. The whole thing came from this generation of young women telling young generation not to repeat their mistakes. Women have choice now, but they still choose to study and work instead of being free slaves for a man. I'm glad women chose happiness. And yet, statistically, you're not right. Because women were at their peak happiness in the 60s, and women today are actually the least happy in all of history. So, sorry, it looks like the facts are against your opinion here. Devil tells men that they should bring back 50s and make women slaves again. This is disgusting and nothing good in traditional values. That is hilarious because what women were doing in the 50s was tradition. This picture that you're literally commenting on is based on tradition. This house should be clean. You should look presentable and be ready to welcome him. Meet him with a smile, take his things, and help him relax immediately. Meals should be ready on time without adding stress or complaints. His opinions and conversations were expected to take priority. Keep the home quiet, prepare his comfort, and create a peaceful environment. A wife's role was centered entirely around her husband's needs. Well, that's not true. It's not her husband's needs, it's family. So it includes him, but also her children. Now, I know that from a modern mindset, this looks like slavery, but let's think about it logically for a second. Call it whatever you want. It doesn't change the fact that women's lives were easier back then because everything listed in these pictures is easier than having a job. Okay, jobs are stressful. Do not tell me you enjoy having a job. You don't. Okay? I mean, if it was normal to be a stay-at-home husband or dad, I would fucking do it because it's an easier life. It's a more relaxing life. I'm not saying that there's not difficulties. Raising children is hard and all that kind of stuff. But it is still preferable. And women are biologically meant to be nurturers when compared to men. So not only is that kind of stuff easier than having some crappy 9 to 5 job, but it's also in line with women's biological and psychological brains. That's just how the world works. Okay? And my last point is slavery. Again, it's not slavery, but you call it slavery. But even if we do use the word slavery, what about men? You keep going, well, women were expected to stay home and cook and clean and serve. Okay, and men were expected to spend 40 hours a week going out and slaving over a job that they hated. Tell me why that's not slavery. Why is it slavery to cook and clean, but it's not slavery for a man to drag his ass out of bed, go to a 9 to 5 job or whatever his job is, and slave away to make money to support his family? Oh, right, I'm so sorry. The reason you don't view it as slavery is because you don't care about men. Right, I had to make sure. Sorry, I almost forgot your reasoning. Hey, so actually the Grimke sisters fought for women's rights, so obviously women hated it. Yeah, but it was manufactured by the Jews before that. Don't speak for us when you're uneducated and a man. Disgusting. Okay, women were not slaves, correct? This dumbass says they were, because certain agendas were in play, brainwashing women to think they are less than men and that they need to be independent. That's true too. So let's talk about this one, for example. As part of the women's lib movement and what the Jews were planning was, the reason why this was pushed so hard and why it worked is because they didn't just simply say, hey, you should get a job. It wasn't that simple. They literally brainwashed and convinced women that you are a slave if you take care of the home. 100% they convinced them of that using those exact words. But what they failed to realize then, and still fail to realize now because you're just that brainwashed, is that there's nothing wrong with being dependent if that's what makes sense as part of your role. The role back then was for a woman to be nurturing of the house and family, and for a man to go out and take care of the family by providing for them and making money at a job. Both of those roles can seem like slavery, but unfortunately that's just part of life. And it's not just women. Men feel the exact same way, just with their job as opposed to the home. It's the same thing. You're just doing something different. But conceptually, it's the same. They convinced women that you're being dependent on your man as if it's a bad thing when it's not, and said you must go to work too, which is far worse than staying home with the family. So, that's how they did it. And then also they made women feel as though they were less than men if they weren't working, which isn't even true. That is a blatantly false statement. Women are not less than men if they're traditional. They're not. I'll say it again. Women are not less than men if they're traditional. Men and women are different. Did you know that over in Eastern countries, they still, to this day, 2026, follow traditional standards of women being nurturers and men being the providers? They still follow those standards, and women in the East are happier than Western women. Gee, I wonder why. Focus on the facts and not what you are brainwashed to believe. But women were not less than men. Women are different from men. Women have different roles. But women's roles are just as important as the man's role. Just because her role was different and involved staying home with the family does not mean she's less important. Her role is extremely important. Her role was important 100 years ago, and it still is now. But they convinced you that if you're home, you're automatically unimportant, and that's not true. It's not true, and it never was from the beginning. No, but why is it so desired that women be dependent on others their whole lives? It's not about being dependent. It's about, like, that's the natural thing that would happen if you're not working, but it was never viewed as a bad thing to do that. Growing up, if my mother figures had been reliant on my father, we'd have nothing. Again, using your own personal experience. And again, that's because you're talking about modern day. Yes, you're right to say that these standards don't work today, but that's because of how they changed the world. I said earlier in this video that they deliberately made cost of living absurdly high to basically force women into the workplace. But if women were never forced to do it, then they also wouldn't need to do it, and therefore we wouldn't have the problems that we see today in the first place. There are single women and single mothers that need work to survive. Yes, today, but not when this all was manufactured. You're missing the point. What happens if a man in this breadwinning role is made redundant or loses his job? This is true, but unfortunately, this is one of the realities that men faced back then. It did happen. There were times that even in the 50s, men would lose their jobs, but they would find a way to fix it. They would. It didn't involve a woman like abandoning her role as a nurturing mother and wife to get a job herself. Now, that did happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen or that it can't happen, but back then things were much different. Cost of living wasn't like 2,000% higher like it is today. What happens to the family if something unexpected happens to him? It's not independence, it's security that is important. I agree. But you're still viewing it through the eyes of modern day and not when this all took place. I never said women shouldn't work. Obviously, situations happen and a woman could find herself needing to work, and that's fine. What I'm referring to is the mentality that women do not need men and that a man's role is not the head of the household. I don't believe in God, but we'll read it anyway. God created man and women different. That's what I said a few minutes ago. They are both equally important, however, they have different roles, like I said. The man throughout history would provide, protect, guide, and support the family while the woman is the primary comfort, caretaker, overall in-home management. That's exactly what I said. The problem is that feminist movements have been trying to shatter these roles and give women the wrong mentality. That is 100% right. No, feminist movements have promoted women's right to choose their role, not have it be dictated to. You're wrong. You keep thinking, well, all they did was give me the right to work. What's the big deal? All I can do is choose. I can still be a stay-at-home mom if I want to. But no, because they use the fact that women went to work as a way to raise taxes and raise the cost of living through inflation in order to force it. You think it's a choice, but it's not. These days, cost of living is so high, in most households, both the man and the woman are forced to work in order to make rent. Do you really believe that's a choice? Or manufactured by the Jews and the government and these roles? Sorry to break it to you. You didn't choose it. It was, in fact, forced upon you. It's okay to abide by traditional roles and take on these roles as long as they aren't oppressive. They're not. They weren't back then either. But in a lot of ways, it was oppressive on men because they were the ones forced to slave away at a job that they hated. But no one focuses on that because it involves the other side. God forbid. Nobody should be forced to live a certain life against their wishes, purely based on society's consensus. Weird, because men have to. People everywhere should have the right to choose how they live their lives. Not every woman wants a child and wants to stay at home every day. Once again, you're talking about, we're discussing history here, but you're using modern day to do it. You're failing. Some want financial security or their own income, and that's okay. Some couples want extra earnings to be able to maximize their outcomes and activities in life. Tradition is okay optionally, but should never be forced onto people who feel like that life isn't right for them. That applies to today, but the reason why it's so talked down upon today is because it caused a problem that started historically. And that's what people in this group are just not getting. It was only a select few women from certain groups, the orange juice box, Freemasons, communists, that protested for it, and it was all just a show to actually get women more involved and make them think they're oppressed for not having to work and pay taxes every day. And literally the only time in history women have ever protested their traditional and natural roles in life is in Zionist occupied United States and Europe in the past 100 years. Listen to this person because they know what they're talking about. And it's all part of their plan to destroy tradition. Let's sit on that for a second, because again, this is exactly what happened. Because of this, not just were women's roles destroyed, men's roles destroyed, and all that kind of stuff, but also to destroy tradition. The Jews, and you can even see it in the compilation I showed you earlier, go watch it if you want, they even admit that not only did they manufacture feminism, but they even manufactured the woke SJW PC culture we've been seeing for the last few decades. And we already know, because we're living in it, yes, the woke SJWs have destroyed Western culture. And just like feminism, that was all manufactured. This was not just like, oh, well, woke culture and social justice just exist because it's a good thing, we're fighting racism. No. It's manufactured garbage to destroy the West. That's why they say things like, we're anti-racist while actually being more racist. Or saying we're inclusive while actually being more divisive. So, yes, all of this SJW, woke culture, PC culture for the last decade was all planned as a way to destroy Western culture and traditions. That is a fact, and I've been talking about it for over a decade. To destroy tradition and Christianity, especially in white countries, so that white people have less kids. That's actually true too. There's a reason why the white race has been dying off for the last few decades too. As of right now, white people are only 8% of the entire world's population. So when people talk about white genocide, it's not a conspiracy theory, and it never has been. It's a fact. It's just the truth, and it's been true since day one. It's been true the entire 15 years I've been talking about it. Sorry if you don't like it. Have less kids and everyone becomes a materialistic, mindless zombie that selfishly only thinks for themselves instead of wanting to start new life and pass on their genes and ideas to create role model citizens for society. The feminist movement just makes women's lives more dull. That's true, because again, if you're into the feminist movement or what they created, you're all at work now, and now you're more depressed than ever, like we've been saying. It's crazy that people are they can't get it. More dull and meaningless because they convinced people that short bursts of dopamine, like partying and having lots of sex and drinking and going to their favorite celebrity concerts, is going to make them fulfilled in life. But if that's all you do in your life, and then you just die and then there's literally nothing left of you to be passed on, 20 or 30 years after you die, there will be absolutely nothing to show for what came of your life. There's a reason that only European and the US and Canadian media talks about modern feminism as if it's the best thing to ever happen. But every other country in the world is completely fine with natural traditional gender roles because that's normal and more fulfilling and actually gives most people a purpose in life. That is 100% fact. I even responded saying, this girl knows the real facts. Love it. Everything you said is 100% true. I just want to add, Eastern countries are literally happier and they still live by traditional roles and no woke culture. Smart people like us already knew this, of course. This person said women weren't upset, didn't protest. Is not true. Women have been protesting inequality for a long time because they're manufactured to. Not all of a sudden, the women's rights movement goes back to the 1800s, including the Seneca Falls Convention in the U.S. Women fought for the right to vote, which led to the 19th Amendment. In 1920, there were also major protests in the 60s and 70s during the women's lib movement, and feminism wasn't created by one person at all. No, it was created by multiple Jews. It developed over time, but many early leaders were women like Mary, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. It was pushed through advertisements. Advertising did sometimes use feminist ideas later, especially in the 60s to the 80s, but it didn't create the movement. Ads followed social change. They didn't invent it in the movement. Came from activism, writing, protest, and political organizing. Seriously, what school did you go to? Obviously, they didn't teach history properly. And that's funny. Imagine thinking that you're going to be getting a proper history lesson on this from college or university when the education that they're teaching you about this literally comes from the lies that the Jews created. And then this person replies, yeah, that's the mainstream narrative. Here are the behind the scenes that they don't tell you about. Stuff that you learn from facts, not school. The idea itself was funded and pushed by men, the Jews, and not for the reason you think it was. From start to finish, and it was gradual, as you can see. In 1837, a French philosopher, Charles Fourier, coined the term feminist to describe his belief in the equality of men and women. In first wave feminism, it was Edward, Mary's father, William Godwin, her late husband, and Percy Shelley. They all took advantage of a few young, vulnerable women, which would later shape the future of feminism. Similarly, Hugh Hefner, the guy who basically started porn, greatly benefited from the women's lib movement and considered himself a feminist. He as well took advantage of vulnerable, naive women to benefit his business, which would later shape the future of pornography. Second wave feminism was heavily funded and supported by three main men, John Rockefeller, Hugh Hefner, and Percy Shelley. And when asked their goal, he responded to abolish marriage and normalize female promiscuity, which is exactly what happened. And John responded, half the population isn't in the workforce or paying taxes. There we go, like I also said. This project can bring us great benefit, and the exact women you named are all women who were greatly traumatized through their childhood because of awful parents and household, which this men took advantage of for their own social and political goals. There is no way you actually believe that women were tired somehow of being provided for and taken care of, exactly, in the house, and they all decided to unite and start a revolution, and the men were scared somehow of how strong and independent the women were, so we had to give you guys your rights. That's literally what, like, people who believe in feminism, like, think that's how it happened. Feminism was not created by a woman. Feminism was created and still maintained by men to benefit certain men. And you can search this all up if you want more detail on it. Search up Rockefeller's funding on feminism or something. There's a few other comments, but they're not really related to the topic, so I'm not going to keep reading. But there you go. As you can see, some of these people know what they're talking about. This is how feminism and why feminism was created. It was not created to benefit women. It was created to destroy tradition, destroy the Western culture, bring in more taxes through working women to benefit the people who really created it, which are the Jews, and then some women lib people a couple decades later started pushing it, and those are the people you actually hear about. It was started by women, so therefore it's good, even though what pushed those women into it were the men before them. So that's the reality. The reality is women are, in fact, more depressed today, and that's because of how our culture has shifted, changed, and quite frankly, died over the last 100 years. So women now are at their peak depression, but yet feminism and SJW and woke culture and the mainstream media and Hollywood will lead you to believe that women are living their best lives due to having full control over their decisions, despite the fact that they're less happy now than any point in history. These are stats that are really obvious, but at least I would hope make you think if you're an idiot. And as for why men commit suicide more, well, there are lots of reasons, but primarily what I said at the start of the video is that, yeah, men deal with more hardships than women, so therefore men are more used to it. Men commit suicide because we've been abandoned by society, because women hate men for no reason, although that was also manufactured by these same corrupt men and Jews. And we've talked about this before. I urge you to watch my video called "The Truth About the Gender War" because I break down pretty heavily as to why men and women hate each other in modern day. What I said here is part of it, but also I break it down further in my gender war video. Yes, you should watch it. Feminism has caused all this damage. It was never meant to help, but that's the way it really is. And if you don't believe me and all this evidence, then that just goes to show that you're part of the problem. Continue being unhappy if you really want. But yes, men do kill themselves more because our lives are simply more difficult and Western society has abandoned us. So instead of getting help, because nobody wants to help men, they decide to just take their own lives instead of dealing with it. And women are more depressed, but without killing themselves because they have more mental health assistance and help than men do. Women have more support in society, they have more shelters, they have more places they can go, they're more focused on by the medical world and school and all that kind of stuff. Women in general get more support by society, and that's why, despite higher depression, get more help and don't go all the way to killing themselves. But men do because society abandoned us. So that's the real truth, for the record.